we're here today. We're going to present an introduction to health impacts of climate change. And I know being community health workers that the health of your communities is important. And so we're hoping that we give you a little bit of info on how some of Minnesota's climate has been changing some of those health impacts, and then sort of what you can do, some tips and resources to help your communities out. So we both work for the Minnesota Department of Health. We're based out of the St. Paul office. My name's David Bell, and I live in South Minneapolis, not too far from here actually. I serve as our Environmental Quality Board coordinator, but I'm also involved in our climate and health program.
And hello, I'm Kimber, Dave's colleague at the St. Paul office for the Department of Health, and I also live in South Minneapolis. And my role at the health department is climate and change. I'm one of the climate and health planners for the climate and health team.
So just a quick outline of what we'll be going through today. We'll pop this up throughout so you can kind of keep track and follow along. But I'll start by talking about some of the observed changes that we have seen so far in Minnesota's climate. Chris will then discuss some of those health impacts that can be associated with those changes. As you see up there. I'll talk briefly about some of the populations then that might be at greater risk that we should try to focus on, keep our eyes out, help them out. And then Chris will wrap us up and give you a little bit more on some of the tips that you can do and some of the resources that might be able to help out along the way. But first, now I'm going to see if this video will work. Just a couple minutes. And I should say, so the video is by the American Public Health Association. They're public health professionals from across the country, and each year they sort of choose a theme. And so 2017 is the year of climate change, so that's why we figured this might be an appropriate opening to our talk.
The science is clear. Climate change is real. It is happening today, and it profoundly affects our health. We are experiencing more intense heat waves, droughts, and wildfires. Young children and seniors are the most vulnerable to heat-related illness. Climate change increases the amount of airborne pollutants and results in higher ozone levels, leading to higher rates of asthma and cardiovascular disease. We are experiencing longer allergy seasons. The rates of Lyme disease have doubled. Vector-borne diseases like Zika, malaria, and West Nile virus reach wider geographic areas than ever before.
We know that we are the first generation to see the impacts of climate change, but most likely the last generation to be able to do something about it.
Our biggest challenge is that not everyone knows that climate change is a threat to our health, both now and in the future. So they're not mobilizing the way that they need to.
The good news is, when we understand the health impacts of climate change, we're more likely to prioritize to take action. And that's why we're asking you to join us in making 2017 the year of climate change and health. Together, we can raise awareness of the health impacts of climate change and build a sense of urgency to act now before it's too late.
I'm joining the year of climate change and health because it needs to become standard that we're designing our communities in ways that protect the environment and support healthy behaviors for everyone.
We can use multimodal transportation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while we build in resilience to combat the effects of climate change.
Climate change affects all of us, regardless of race, income, or zip code. But some communities need more help than others to overcome the impacts on health.
We need sustainable agricultural practices and smart subsidies and incentives that help us to economically deliver healthy food to all communities in our growing population.
APHA's long-term vision is to create the healthiest nation in one generation, and addressing the health impacts of climate change is the critical step. We are declaring 2017 the year of climate change and health because we want everyone to have the opportunity to live a long, healthier life. We need your help. Please join us. Learn more at apha.org/climate.
We're back. All right, so that's kind of a good little teaser, a little opening of a lot of the big issues that work with climate and health. And we also think it's important, though, to sort of talk. A lot of those are kind of some big issues that you heard in there. And it's important, I think, to note that it's not all politics and polar bears, as we like to say. And so we like to kind of start our talks and sort of also mention sort of some personal stories and maybe ways that climate have impacted us directly. And after both of us share a quick story, if anyone here would like to think of something and share as well, we would welcome that. But so my story that I like to share is my family's from the eastern shore of Virginia. So it's the thin peninsula that helps create the Chesapeake Bay. We've had a family farm over there for generations. In fact, our deed on our farming traced back to 1637. So our family's been over here for a while. Our farm's 240 acres. We have 80 acres is farmable land, 80 acres that we keep in sort of forest timber. And our other 80 acres has, it was initially some salt marsh, but it's also now 80 acres of salt marsh. The land over there is very flat, so very small levels in sea level rise out there have really had an impact on our farm to a level where my dad has informed my brother and I that we may be the bells that have to decide it's time to maybe sell this land for some other purpose. So no pressure there, just 380 years of family history that's kind of coming to a head in the next few decades if we keep seeing the trends that we're seeing on our farm.
And my quick story is, and maybe some of you have experienced it also, but in 2015, the Minnehaha Creek flooded. There was a lot of really heavy rain around Memorial Day that year, and the creek flooded way above its banks, and neighbors had lots of water in their basements that they had to deal with for quite a while for lots of cleanup. The flood situation didn't resolve itself until July, right around the 4th of July. So it was quite an impact for people for a long time. And I've lived in that area for 35 years, and it does flood, but that's the worst I've ever seen it really hung around there. Maybe some of you has experienced it too, but no. We're wondering if any of you have a story or two you'd like to share with just a couple people. And if not, that's fine. We can move right on. So.
Yeah, and if not, you might think of things as we go through the presentation and sort of highlight some of the changes that have been happening. It might sort of click like, oh, maybe that's related to our changing climate, and I kind of see how this impacts me. So, yeah, that's great. We'll just keep moving too. So real quick, just want to do a definition between weather and climate. We tend to think weather is more on days and weeks kind of things, and climate's more on the decades. So start thinking about it more 20 to 30 years is when we start to sort of decide this is a change in climate or that type of thing. And we'll jump right into Minnesota's changing climate. So wouldn't be a climate change kind of talk if I didn't throw a line graph and some trend lines at you, but we just couldn't help ourselves with it, I suppose. There's kind of two main changes in our climate here in Minnesota that we started to see. And the first one is kind of what people think about it. There has been a change in temperature in Minnesota. The main takeaway from all this, though, that we're looking at is really the rate of change in our temperature increase. So these two graphs, it's disjointed, but it goes back 120 years or so. That far, your left side is 1895 to 1959. And you see we still had a little bit of a warming trend for our annual temperatures, but it was at a rate of about what would end up being 2 degrees Fahrenheit per century. Right around then, 1960, 1970s, though, that trend started to increase to a level where we're now at about 5 degrees Fahrenheit change per century. So you might think, oh, it's 5 degrees, that might be a little warmer, I like summer. The problem is that even though those small changes, they really have some pretty big impacts on our environment. It affects a lot of the farm country here in Minnesota, so it can have a pretty big impact on the growing season, crop yields, soil moisture. It impacts the type of wildlife that are migrating, as well as some insects. Some of them winter over, and if we don't get too cold, they could still be here. We'll have greater numbers of some pests, and they move about in different ways with the warmer weather. It changes some of our forest tree species types are changing, moving further north in our state. It also just has an impact on how we spend our times. I know with some of the recent heat that we've had lately, I've spent more time in my cold basement than out running around like I normally would at this time of year even. So sounds like small amounts, but it can really have these sort of wider impacts to the rest of our state. This is the same graph as before, but now we're just highlighting as well that 9 of the 10 warmest years in our state have happened in the last couple decades, and particularly late 90s, early 2000s onwards. We're having these trends of record-setting heat years here in Minnesota. So within that warming pattern, there's sort of these 3 significant observations. And winter temperatures rising twice as fast as our annual average. I know that's not what people think when they think climate change, warming, they think hot summers. But really the big thing that we've noticed in our state is that our winters are milder and those temperatures are increasing faster. Another big change with our heat is, again, it's not that like our highs in the summer are getting warmer, but it's those overnight lows. We're not cooling down as much at night as we used to. And that can be a real big problem, especially during heat waves. And as a health thing, we really do rely on it cooling down at night to sort of help people out, especially at extended periods of heat. If you were to break down our state into sort of 3 regions, north, central, and southern, a trend we've seen as well is actually northern Minnesota is warming faster than southern Minnesota. I think the degree changes was like around 1 degree change Fahrenheit in southern, but the north is about 2.2 or so right now. The second big change that I mentioned that's observed now in Minnesota has been a change in our average annual precipitation. This can be related to the warmer weather that we're seeing. When it's warmer, you can get more evaporation. And also the warmer air just holds more water vapor as well, which can be a reason for some of our increased rainstorms. So this graph again is very similar to the temperature one. Same breakdown, 1895 to 1959. And we actually had a decreasing trend in the amount of precipitation in Minnesota that was minus 2 inches per year. Although that is probably largely drawn by Dust Bowl era there. So that's probably why we had the negative. But again, once you get to 1960-70, our rainfall starts to increase, and that shift has moved to where we're at about 5 inches per century rate of increasing rain. So it's a small amount each year, but it is trending upwards. So our wet state's getting wetter. I'll say it's not just that we're getting more rain. It's really, well, we are, but the character of that rain has really started to change. So we're getting more both sort of extreme wet, but also some dry spells. So we're getting this increase in more local heavy rains. And because of that localization, you're going to get some areas that are flooding, while somewhere not too far away may actually be experiencing a drought. Minnesota actually has a pretty good example of that. In 2012 was actually one of our the most recent dry year. It wasn't like full horrible drought like Dust Bowl kind of thing, but it was pretty dry. And we had 75 counties in the state that were declared disaster for drought. But in the same year, we had 15 counties and 3 tribal reservations that were declared disaster for flooding. And actually 8 of those counties in that same year declared disaster for both floods and drought. So that's part of this localized nature of we're having big intense rain, and even if it's hitting a drought area, it might be packed, coming down hard and fast, and that can cause a lot of flash flooding as well. So that the increase then is being driven by a lot of those heavy rain events that I'm talking about. We've had 15 historic mega rain events, as they're called, going back to 1858. 7 of those 15 have happened since 2002, and we've had, for the first time, 2 of them recorded in the same year in 2016. So the definition for a mega rain is an event that had 6 inches of rain or more over 1,000 square miles, with the peak of that event being 8 inches or higher. And to sort of put perspective on that 1,000 square miles, because I know that's kind of I don't know what that is. Crow Wing County in sort of north central Minnesota is almost exactly 1,000 square miles. But for this group, here in the metro, it'd be like a storm that covers completely Hennepin County, Ramsey County, and Washington County. Those three together are just a little bit over 1,000 square miles in size. So these mega rains have started to pop up more often in our state. Now, it's not just these that are causing floods or our problem. It's other rains as well. You can get floods without a mega rain event or that kind of thing. These are just particularly large. We've also looked at studies that Minnesota over the last 50 years has doubled the amount of rainstorms that are 3 or more inches as well. So a lot of those can also cause problems. And a lot of that can depend on if you get hit one rainstorm, another, when ground's already fully saturated, that leads to a lot of the kind of flash flooding that's happening more often now. So those are the two main effects that we have observed. I mean, our climate scientists are looking at other things, but these are the two strongest areas that we can point to and say, we have observed the change in our climate. So these can lead to a myriad of issues, including the heat waves, air quality issues, the flooding and drought I've talked about, as well as some of that migration of like mosquitoes and ticks that can lead to more like Lyme disease or those type of issues. So I'm gonna pass it to Chris, and she's gonna take us through the next part. So just
okay. Thank you, David. Move on to health impacts. So as we said here in the slide, we'll be talking about some of the health impacts of climate change, and we'll look at a number of them, and we will start with heat waves. Okay. A heat wave is when the weather is much hotter than normal, much hotter or more humid than normal for a certain area. And the definition of a heat wave in specific varies based on what is normal for that area, and it includes the temperature, the humidity or dew point, the type and amount of clouds, and also the how acclimated the people are to heat. So if you're used to a lot of heat, it's not as much of a heat wave. And as you know, our bodies function best around a body temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. When body temperature rises, our bodies use two different ways to cool itself: by sweating, one, and by increasing the blood circulation close to the skin surface. So during a heat wave, our bodies stay cool. If our body's ability to stay cool may become limited. And if we can't stay cool, then a range of health-related symptoms may occur. Different conditions may develop. Some of these are relatively minor, like a heat rash or heat cramps. They can be dealt with. Others are much more serious, including heat exhaustion. And if left untreated, heat exhaustion can lead to heat stroke, and that's a life-threatening situation that needs emergency care, where the body's temperature is at 104 degrees Fahrenheit or greater. So that's where an emergency is definitely in place. A high body temperature can damage vital organs like the brain, the liver, and the kidneys. So this can be very serious and may even lead to death at that point. Next, we'll talk about health impacts of air quality issues. So climate change is expected to lead to more air pollution. And air pollution can have some serious health impacts also. It can cause breathing problems like bronchitis or pneumonia or asthma. It can aggravate allergies, other breathing problems like emphysema or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD, and heart disease. And prolonged exposure to air pollution can put people at risk for even developing heart disease or cancer or other respiratory diseases. People with any of these conditions may experience like chest pain, shortness of breath, breathing issues, wheezing, coughing, and then fatigue in general. Climate change is also expected to increase the amount of pollen that's in the air. And the health impacts from pollen, that's pretty clear. People that suffer from pollen allergies will be suffering more. So that's pretty straightforward. Mold is another issue, and mold growth can be enhanced by more moisture in the air, and can be caused by increasing, if there are floods, it could be more mold growing. Also increase in temperature. If it's hotter or if it's more humid, mold can tend to grow. And these are some of the climate changes that David described earlier. The health impacts from mold, pretty straightforward, but they can lead to some irritations of respiratory functions, and it could increase problems for people with asthma or other weakened immune systems. Okay, the next health impact we'll talk about is flooding and droughts. So flooding can cause a number of health impacts as well. It can cause physical injuries from damage to buildings or roads, and even drowning. Lead to mold allergies. People can get sick from eating contaminated food or drinking water that's been contaminated. With a flood situation, you might not be able to access food for a while, or could also cause a situation where you lose loss of housing, lose your home, or the inability to go to work because the roads are out or the house or the building is flooded. And of course, it can also cause mental stress, having to deal with cleanup and repairs, having to deal with insurance issues, having to replace belongings. Some places you may need to find a new place to live or a new place to work, so that's pretty stressful. And it can also, of course, cause feelings of depression and anxiety. As David mentioned, some areas of the state may also experience drought conditions, very dry conditions. Drought or lower water levels can lead to these health impacts that are on the slide here. Decreased supply of drinking water or decreased supply of water to grow food, potential concentration of pollution, and increased risk of wildfire. If it's very dry out, there's a chance that things could catch fire more easily. And wildfires can cause similar, breathing problems for people with breathing conditions, property damage, of course, and then mental stress also, similar to situations of flooding. It's stressful for people. Okay, and then we'll just cover a couple of additional health impacts of climate change real quickly here. As David mentioned, there is a chance that climate change will increase our exposure to mosquitoes and ticks. And you're probably familiar, being health professionals, you're probably familiar, when mosquitoes sting, they can carry viruses like West Nile virus. When ticks bite, they can carry disease, like Lyme disease, we have here. And then with a severe storm or a flood situation, the power can go out. I'm sure you've all experienced that at some point. And health impacts from the power outages include, again, potentially getting sick from eating contaminated food or contaminated water if there's no refrigeration available, or if the water hasn't been treated properly. You could also have heat illnesses because you're not maybe able to turn on a fan or turn on the air conditioning if there's no power. And there's a chance of slight chance of increased house fires because people are using candles because the lights are not working. And then finally, there can be a chance of increased carbon monoxide poisoning if people are trying to power their homes with gas-powered generators, and sometimes they bring them inside, and that's not good. There's not enough ventilation for that. So we have a question for you to think about here. We haven't overwhelmed you, hopefully. Based on what we've covered so far about the health impacts of climate change, let's talk a little bit about how this might affect the health of your clients and the communities that you serve. So this question, what health issues do your clients or your communities experience that may be of greater concern due to our changing climate? So anything come to mind off the top of your head?
I have a question about, I heard a rumor that somebody saw a dengue mosquito up here. So is there any truth to mosquitoes that can carry tropical disease being present in Minnesota?
Things are changing, but I'm not, that's not my area of expertise. David, maybe you have something to say about.
Yeah, I was actually at an event yesterday, and this question came up as well. And at the moment, no. As far as we're aware, those types of mosquitoes, as well as like Zika virus and some of those, they're not able to live here now. But the problem that's happened, climate's not just changing here in Minnesota, but those types of mosquitoes have started to migrate further north. That's why you've heard, again, I'll go back to Zika's example, Florida, parts of Texas, and some of those southern areas of our country are starting to. And the worry is, as this warming trend happens, that Minnesota will be maybe a little more prone to be able to allow those types of mosquitoes to survive. They still have a fairly long way to travel up here, but with this, it's sort of, it makes it more of a chance that it could. Another part of that, though, something that we have up here is, again, our winters do kill off a lot of those types of pests as well. But if our winters stay warmer, some of them, I know ticks and all, they can winter over, and if we're more mild, they'll wake up again in the spring, and we can have higher numbers of them. So right now, let's say we haven't seen any on that level that I'm aware of, but it is something to track and sort of keep on our radar, so to speak, and is one of the reasons we're concerned about the warming trend across the country. So,
All right. Anyone else have anything quickly? Okay.
Well, I think probably because it's getting warmer too, but the problem of mold is very common with people, and black mold, especially in the warm, and that's very, you get sick from that, and I've been around people who have, wheezing and chest pains and all sorts of things. In fact, in the past, I lived in a house with mold problems, so I kind of know. I got out, but in the summer, it really intensifies that, and then with the heat, it really. So, do you have any insight about mold in the summer?
Well, again, that's a climate change issue that it will be getting worse. It's been around for forever, but could kind of be enhanced. We have lots of resources about mold mitigation in our Minnesota Department of Health website. So if you've got questions about that, you can certainly check that out. I didn't repeat the question, but she was asking about if mold, or kind of stating in general that mold is changing and what can we do about that. So there are resources out there definitely to deal with that. So, in the interest of time, lunch and all, I think we'll just switch back over to David, and we've got time for questions at the end. So.
yeah, and like our presentation's title, this is sort of our introduction to it, and we have a lot more resources that can go into more in depth if anyone wants to talk with us afterwards or get contact information. We're more than happy to go into more in-depth conversations with people too. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about some of the populations that are at greater risk for topics that Chris brought up. So on the heat waves, and some of these may be a little bit obvious to you, right? Elderly, those 65 and older, and young children, 5 and younger, are going to be more susceptible. We're particularly worried about older people that are living alone. Is someone that we all should kind of keep track in our neighborhoods. I know there's someone in my neighborhood who he lives all alone, and we make a good effort to go over and try and check on him when it's hot, mow his lawn, check on his dog and stuff, because he just has a harder time getting around. Those with some pre-existing disease conditions, heart, lung diseases, but also endocrine, liver diseases, mental health issues, all of these can kind of be exacerbated in a heat wave. Certain medications, a lot of this has to do with the increase in blood flow, as Chris was talking about, but people who are on diuretics, tranquilizers, as well as psychotropic drugs are ones to kind of keep an eye out for. A fairly obvious one, if you're outside in a heat wave, it's going to be hot for you. Athletes, I remember growing up, I played soccer over in Blaine, have the big tournament, and inevitably every year we'd have to stop games early, or you have more breaks, make sure people are getting water. So there's precautions that are kind of baked in, but a lot of people also work outdoors, and that's something that not taking a heat event lightly kind of thing. There's no need to power through these things to show manliness or whatever else in some of these jobs. I think it's important that we highlight that these can be real health issues. and have serious consequences. There's also clearly a concern for the homeless in our communities on how they're going to deal with these kind of situations. Similar to the heat waves, again, we're worried about older adults, younger children. You know, they're just weakened immune systems, or they're still developing. It can just be they just get affected maybe a little sooner than, I'll just say, everyday people, or however else you want to characterize that. Again, pre-existing conditions, lung and heart disease, but also high blood pressure can be a problem. Some of the breathing problems, again, asthma, COPD, emphysema, and again, those working outside. Chris mentioned, again, on pollen and mold, and like we said, it seems like this could be increasing. The climate definitely kind of helps set up the situation to be favorable for mold, and there has been some studies on our pollen season that it seems to be increasing in Minnesota. So I believe it was a ragweed that was looked at, but from 1995 to 2015, the ragweed season and the pollen season has increased from 15 or up to 15 to 25 days longer. It kind of varies on where you are in the state, but so those with these allergies starting to experience already at least 2 weeks or more longer pollen season to have to deal with that issue. Floods, again, I feel like, you know, some of these are obvious. You live near water, especially rivers and stuff, you could have flooding risk. But another thing to point out is it's also living near small creeks or streams or even culverts and some of or dried stream bed. The event I was at yesterday was down in Waseca, Minnesota. They're not near any rivers. They have a couple lakes, but they had a over 10-inch rain event last fall and had a huge flash flood that covered their entire town, mostly because their storm ditches and the culverts in their area overflowed and didn't have anywhere else to go except town. So that's an instance that we're starting to see these flash flood events happen more, where towns may not have expected it because we're not next to a big river. Being out at night tends to be risky for flash floods. 75% of deaths are people who are out at night during a flash flood. That's tough. You can't see maybe if the water is, these flash floods can happen quickly at times. It's hard to tell if they're coming at you, where they are per se. Obviously driving in a flood's not great, but they happen not on our schedules, right? And you're trying to get where you are, roads can be closed from the water. It can be hard to tell if they've been washed out or what's happened. So we definitely don't drive through flooded roads is a tip for us. Another group we like to talk about is private well owners. I do some well outreach at the fair each year, and I think it's interesting to me when you talk to people, realizing how many aren't aware where their water's coming from. Am I on a city? Am I on a private well? And it's very important to know that, especially if you are in a flood-prone area, though, because if flood waters come up around your wellhead or over top, or we even recommend within just 50 feet of your well, that it's important that you test and potentially will need to disinfect, because if you have contaminated water in your house, you may not always taste or notice that difference. And floods can be a real big kind of spreader of disease in that sense too. Droughts. So I have farming, fishing, and shipping, and this is a lot more on livelihood of people, right? And some of this will get at our access to food and water as a state. You know, if we have prolonged periods of drought in our agricultural area, that can obviously affect food supply. It might get muted a little because we're a big country and things kind of get spread out in that sense. But for those that are working here, it's really this mental health issue is a big one. And I think that it's something that we're starting to talk about a lot more related to climate change and the health impacts. It's a loss of livelihood, or it hurts your equipment, or you get behind. I mean, there's not many margins of error in these type of industries as well. Again, the flooding I was at Waseca yesterday, mental health was actually talked about a fair amount, where the city was wondering months later we're having increased suicide rates, it seems. There seems to be more kids coming into counselors at school. They'll just kind of still dealing with the impacts of financial loss of their family and homes from that, and it's something that persists afterwards. So I think that's an area that I think as public health workers that's important for us to start and recognize and get involved in as well. Drought, though, can also obviously have some breathing problems, right? If it's really dusty, if you're in that area, kicks up more dust and particulates in the air, you're going to have problem breathing. It's going to hit those people we talked about poor air quality as well. It's not just dusty areas, though. I mean, increases the chance of forest fires. For instance, northern Minnesota gets dry there. Greater risk from forest fires, and smoke from the inhalation can also be a breathing problem issue. Real quickly, just sort of on these other impacts, you know, I don't want to say let's never go outdoors again kind of thing. It sort of sounds that way with floods and ticks and all this, but I think the important thing is to just sort of, we need to be aware that these are changes that are happening, and as we're all best prepared to deal with them, you know, that's the best way to go forward, and try to not kind of poo-poo around it, I guess. It's there, it's something that we should acknowledge, and there are ways to deal with it. The power outages that Chris mentioned, you know, those can happen winter or summer. Obviously, you get exposed to higher extreme temperatures, and I think, again, a big part of that is those with pre-existing conditions or accessibility issues. It's important to identify them in our community. There's so many different instances where they're going to be potentially in trouble, and it's realizing when it gets really hot or there's power outages, we need to make sure that those people are checked up on, or that they still have ways to get to the hospital if they need to, or because there could be problems calling emergency services and that type of thing in power outage. So there's a lot of moving parts with all that, but that's where we're going to have to stop right now, I think. We'll pass it off to Chris for the final bit.
Okay, now we'll finish our presentation with what you can do about all of this. There are some things that you can definitely do to strengthen the health of your communities, your clients, help to protect them, and mostly be prepared for extreme weather events that are coming down the way. So we're going to cover 5 ways you can do this, 5 things you can do to address the health impacts of climate change. And the next slides are going to give you a few of these pointers, and they are also, some of them, ways to save money. So that's kind of a win-win on that. All right, so number 1, protecting your clients, protect your clients and your communities from the health impacts of heat waves by being prepared. And factors that increase the risks of illness or death due to heat waves are these on the slide. You know, if you don't have air conditioning in your home or your workplace, if you live in an urban area, it's a little hotter in the urban areas because of the heat island effect. Living on the top floor of a house or an apartment building can sometimes be an issue because heat rises and it's a little bit warmer in the top floors. Living alone or being socially isolated is an issue. You know, as David said, checking on people that live alone. Being outside in the hot sun, of course, and then working or playing outside are issues. So think about these factors that people that you serve, your clients or your communities may experience. And what we can do about that is when the local news on TV or the radio or Twitter, Facebook, newspaper talks about a heat wave coming, what can you do to protect your clients or your community members? Well, you can start by reviewing the extreme heat tip sheet that we had as a handout today. This is available on the Minnesota Department of Health website. The web address is here on the slide, and it's also on the sheet. So if you'd like to get more copies or point other people to that, you've got that there. It is available, in addition to English, it's available in 5 other languages, and we've got a few copies of the other languages here that you can take on your way out if you'd like. And those include Hmong, Karen, Oromo, Somali, and Spanish. The main point of the tip sheet is, the main 3 points are to stay hydrated, stay cool, and stay informed. So it's pretty straightforward. So share this tip sheet with any of your clients who may be at greater risk for health impacts from heat wave. And then also share the tips with your community members if you're able to. The more people that are able to protect themselves and be prepared to stay cool, the better for all of us. About that. Also, you can check your county health department website to learn more about air-conditioned buildings, public buildings that may be available for people to get in outside of the heat, take a break from the heat. And this slide shows an example of the what's Hennepin County has on their website with different locations that are for cooling places where people can get inside. And if you can't find information on a county health department website, go ahead and call them, because they do stay on top of where these air-conditioned locations are for people. So. Okay, number 2. Secondly, protect the health of your clients and your community members by being prepared for poor air quality days. And poor air quality can occur from either too much air pollution, also from pollen, and if there's a wildfire issue, there's too much smoke in the air. If you take care of anyone who has breathing problems, we encourage you to sign up to receive air quality alerts. And the web address for those is on the slide here. Air quality alerts are daily air quality forecasts for over 15 locations across the state of Minnesota, and they're shown on the slide, on the map on the slide. Air quality alerts will tell you if the air quality for the day is either good or moderate or unhealthy. And you receive these alerts either by email, by Twitter, or you can get the mobile app also for that. And this would be very helpful information to share with any of your clients or community members that have breathing problems. You can also, or your clients or community members can call the air quality information line, and the 2 phone numbers are on the slide for that. And if you're interested in a little bit more information on the effects of air quality and health, you can check out there's a series of videos available on air quality and health. And you can search for them on the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's YouTube pages if you'd like, or there's a very long web address here that you can go to and see the videos there. Each video is between 1 and 6 minutes in length, and they are also in 4 languages: English, Hmong, Somali, and Spanish. So again, you can share that with any of your clients. The Minnesota Department of Health and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency are working together to raise the awareness about air quality in our state and the risks and steps people can take to protect themselves. So you can get additional information at the Be Air Aware location, and that's also the card that we had as a handout, and the web address is on this also. So again, you can share that with those that have breathing problems. All right. The third action that most of us can take is to drive less. And you can do this by walking or biking, carpooling, using transit, those kinds of things, using those options for transportation. These options will reduce air pollution. And it can also improve your physical health and your mental health if you're out being a little bit more active. And even definitely saves money, because these are options that are cheaper than owning and driving your own car. So, the fourth action that we suggest is to lower your footprint. And the large U.S. agricultural system does contribute to climate change in our country, because it uses a lot of energy to grow food, produce it, process it, and then transport it all around the country and all around the world. So there are a couple of things you can do to reduce your own impact on the food system, and that's by you can eat less meat is one option for that. You can also buy foods locally, like at the farmers market, so that they aren't transported very far. And you can also consider growing some of your own food, possibly. And the fifth action we'd like to share with you is reduce, reuse, recycle. And this includes reducing the amount of things that you buy, so you've got less to consume, reusing products when it's possible to do that, and then of course recycling things like milk cartons or cereal boxes, those kinds of things. It takes less energy to make new products from recycled materials than it does to make new products from raw materials. So by reducing, reusing, and recycling, that will reduce pollution in general. So with that, in summary, Minnesota's climate is changing with increasing temperatures and changes in precipitation. Climate changes can lead to some very serious health impacts, and there are things that you can do about that to reduce the health impacts from climate change that will protect the health of your clients, your communities, and also yourself. So with that, we have, if you have any questions for us,